So the last couple of weeks have been time consuming and rough. The Yaris is no more. A couple of weeks ago when it was raining non-stop, Natalie had an accident in that thing, so front end of that is gone. That car's a total loss. Did spend some time going back and forth to the hospital. She had some minor fractures that needed to be treated. So I haven't really had much time to work on any of my personal projects. Been back and forth, but now that I'm back in my house a little bit more consistently, I have my truck back under the knife. And the reason for that is I still wasn't happy with the brake pedal feel. At some point I realized that the problem was really my load sensing proportioning valve, or LSPV as Toyota calls it. Now what the LSPV is, it's a brake proportioning valve that sits in the back. It has a lever that attaches to the rear axle, and basically when you put a load in the bed of the truck and the axle raises up, right, relative to the frame, in other words the back of the truck is going down from the weight of the load, the tilting of that lever upward causes the valve to bias the brakes more toward the back. In other words, gives you more braking power toward the rear because you now have a load back there, and that makes sense. Unfortunately, because this valve is purely mechanical, it has no sensors or any kind of smart interface. That does mean that if you lower your truck from the perspective of that valve, you technically always have a load in the back of the truck, even though you don't. That means you will have a lot more brake pressure toward the rear than you need. And when you start messing around with things like with the stock brakes, you probably won't notice too much. But once you upgrade to a better set of brakes, it was noticeable even on the Wilwoods. It was much worse with the Brembos. But basically, you get a massive rear brake bias, and you don't want a rear brake bias in a truck with an unloaded bed. In emergency stopping situations, this would cause the bed of my truck, the back of my truck, to kick out. And if you're not prepared for that, you're likely to spin and lose control. Just because I do a lot of autocross, HPD, stuff like that, like I'm able to manage it and have never had a massive issue. Although the very, very first time it happened and I realized, I was coming up a hill on the turnpike many years ago, and right as I crest the hill, I noticed that on the other side of the hill, even though the highway was empty up until there, on the other side is literally a line of cars parked on the highway in the typical stupid South Florida traffic jam that people make for no reason. And I slammed my brakes, and also because I was going over hill, you know, kind of transitioning weight over onto the nose like that, the truck spun out and I went off into the grass. Luckily I didn't hit anything or anybody, so I just turned it around and got back on the road and kept going along my merry way. However, it's not nice in other situations, especially if I were to lend this to someone and they didn't know that, they weren't prepared for that, they would have a bad situation. I don't usually lend my truck, but every now and again, you know, a cousin or somebody has to go buy a motorcycle and they've borrowed my truck for that. So anywho, what I did was I killed the load sensing proportioning valve and replaced it with a Wilwood. And although with that thing gone, the LSPV gone, now the SC brake setup felt fantastic and felt the way it was supposed to feel. Ultimately, I want the pedal to be a little bit stiffer, so I went back to the Tacoma booster and master cylinder that you see there, because that's a 1-inch bore instead of a 7/8, which means that the pedal will be even firmer. I mean, I don't have to be this picky, but ultimately with the grade of hardware and the cost of the hardware that I've thrown at the brakes on this truck, I just can't accept anything less than perfection. So I'm going to keep massaging it until I get exactly the brake feel that I want. And that's just, you know, it is what it is. I have $750 gyro disc 2-piece brake rotors that have to have custom machined to work with the Tacoma hubs. I have Brembo, you know, 4-piston brake calipers that are for a Cadillac ATS that weighs 1,000 pounds more than this truck does. You know, I've got stainless lines everywhere. It would be ridiculous to me. I've got stop tech pads and brake lines. It'd be ridiculous to me if this thing did not have a rock solid pedal and the brakes didn't inspire utter confidence every time I stepped on it, especially because I'm running 255 Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2 tires on every single corner. Like, I should feel utter confidence in dry weather when I'm smacking my brakes, and the reality is up until now I haven't. Once the LSPV kind of started going along its merry way and then stopped biasing the brakes backward, I could feel a nice brake, you know, feel from the front finally. But ultimately I decided to go back to this, and realistically this is a smaller diameter brake booster. The SC one reaches up until the back of this intake manifold, is much larger diameter, bigger. I mean, it's more weight. I had a custom bend lines and unfortunately got rid of my old lines in order to make the SC setup work, so that means I'm going to be bending some lines to make the Tacoma setup work once more, but I'm okay with that. Let's go around the back. I'll show you guys what the Wilwood proportioning valve setup looks like, and that's actually pretty cool. If you've never seen this before, I mean, I looked up so much information to try to figure out how to make this work, and everyone that had a video was for like a Tundra or something else. But I remember back in the Custom Tacos forum days, people were always talking about eliminating that and putting an adjustable valve, but I couldn't find anything online no matter where I searched. So I figured it out on my own, and I'm going to show you guys so that you can do it. Major heads up, anytime you modify anything in the braking system of a car from what came from the factory, you are taking your life and that of your passengers into your hands. If you don't know what you're doing, if you have any doubts, and even if you think you do, you know, I recommend you not do it. I recommend you get an expert to do it. I take zero responsibility for whatever happens to you for trying these things out. Anytime you modify anything on a car, it's gonna be different than what was validated and tested and verified by the manufacturer, and it's gonna be inherently dangerous, right? I'm an engineer. I have confidence in what I'm doing. I trust my own work. I have many years of experience in mechanics. You might not. Either way, I take no responsibility for your results, and my results are not representative of whatever you will find or might accomplish in your own setup. So keep that in mind. We're modifying here. Nothing here is written in stone. Nothing here is guaranteed to work. So please, please, please always proceed in the safest manner possible. Consult an expert, etc. So the first thing that you got to check out is when you're looking at this is in the fender well, front driver's side, right? Take your wheel out, you remove this plastic or actually rubber liner that's in there, you'll be able to see these brake line junctions, right? Now, what I've done here is that I've removed the line that came off this one. So this sends braking pressure, there's supposed to be a tube here, right? But from the master cylinder over to the rear LSPV, and then from the LSPV, there's another line that runs up to where this brass fitting is, and that's the recirculation line. Because I'm getting rid of the LSPV, now I don't need that recirculation line, so I've removed that line and followed it all the way to the back and removed it from there, and I've capped this off with an M10 by 1 fitting that I got on Amazon. It's an empty, I believe. I will put the information on that in the description, but that's no longer used, so you need to cap it off. I've used, right, it's meant to cap off brake lines, so it has the correct flare, so it seals, but I still went ahead and added a Permatex hydraulic fluid thread locker, just as an added safety precaution. If the flare's doing its job, it's supposed to seal without that, but, you know, I'm just being extra careful in an abundance of caution, right? So I've done that. This is done. It's ready to roll. Now we'll go to the back and I'll show you the brake proportioning setup and explain how that works. So here we have the original location of the LSPV from Toyota. Now what I did here was I undid the LSPV from the axle, then I removed this bracket here that held the original LSPV. I went ahead and cut the bottom off the bracket. The bottom portion had these two little pieces that grabbed the lever that goes to the axle. Now, those two pieces would interfere with turning the knob for the Wilwood valve, so that's why they had to be cut. Once they were cut, I installed this here. I took the brake valve from Wilwood and I installed the brake line into it, just lightly threaded it by hand, right? And I took one of these bolts, I dabbed the end in some red nail polish, and I put it across to tap here. Did the same thing with the other one. Then I took this out and I took the bracket out, and with those two marks I knew where to drill holes into this bracket so that I could have the screws for mounting my Wilwood valve, right? I drilled those holes, and then I took this thing, primed it, and painted it with a good paint.
VHT's roll bar and chassis black, I found that it really resists rust pretty well, even though it's not really spec'd for that. So, you know, a little tip there. It's pretty good stuff. I used it on the rusty, crusty Celica and never rusted where I painted it, so really happy with the performance of that. So anywho, I put a nut on the back side for each bolt, slid the bolts through, right, installed them. Then I installed the bracket to the frame. Obviously you're not going to be able to get in here to put those nuts back there if this is already installed on the frame. You can get the one on the top maybe, but not the one on the bottom. So go ahead and do that. Then obviously I had threaded this in, put everything down. I tightened this with a 10mm flare nut wrench. Then I got myself a -4AN to M10x1 adapter fitting. This is made by IPC or ITC or IPC Billet. Again, I'll link that in the description. They make some throttle body adapters and stuff. Like I used one for the Camaro for the LT5 throttle body. I'm pretty sure these were probably intended for fuel lines and not necessarily for brake purposes. However, the material is aluminum, and aluminum can handle brake fluid. Just a heads up, again, this is something that's not OEM, and you don't know how it's going to go long term. I'm going to be testing this and getting it to where I'm happy with it. But again, you might be taking a risk using that. But it's what I used so that I could adapt a stainless brake line here, and it worked for me. That brake line runs across and over to the axle. Looking at the axle, you can see that the stainless line comes to another -4AN to M10x1 fitting. Ideally, I'd like to just have a brake line made with an M10x1 fitting on either end so that I don't have to have these adapters at all. They are flared at the end, right? So they should work and seal properly. I didn't like the cut, like the chamfered in cut for that flare, because it looked pretty chattered, like as if they, you know, didn't have the drill bit coming in straight. It almost looked like it walked a lot, and so it was kind of toothy. This fitting being steel, this being aluminum, I figured when I tighten this down, it should force the aluminum to conform and seal. But when I go bleed this, I will find out for sure, and I will let you guys know whether it worked or not. I did use, again, the Permatex thread sealer on all of these junctions. Once more, the sealing should happen on the flare and not on the thread for an M10x1 flared connection. So we'll see how that goes. I'm gonna test it. I know for a fact that, you know, I do have the flare. I'm just gonna see if it seals correctly. If not, guess I'll have to have a custom brake line made, and we'll see. But with this line in here, technically the last rubber brake line is gone. That means that I should have the most solid possible brake pedal, because there should be no more flex. Plus, typically, you know, stainless lines are a little bit smaller in inner diameter, which means that, you know, I should have more pressure, should feel heavier at the pedal, which is what I want. I don't want a spongy, crappy feeling brake pedal. So really, all that's left is for me to bend the custom lines for my master up there, which I'll probably do tomorrow, and then go ahead and bleed the entire system. I have the Wilwood valve threaded all the way in, which is allowing full flow to the rear. I'll do that so that I can, obviously you start bleeding from the back. I bleed the back out, then I'll, you know, kind of go bleed the fronts. I'll probably adjust the valve and then re-bleed the fronts just to see what that does for me, make sure that I'm thorough. It shouldn't technically matter, right? If I have full flow in all directions, I should be able to bleed in all directions without making any adjustments, and it shouldn't matter. But, you know, just out of an abundance of caution, I'll mess around with it. And when I did the Miata's adjustable proportioning valve, I had to mess around a bit. I used the very exact same proportioning valve on the Tacoma that I use for the Miata. I will link in the description. I got it from 949 Racing / Super Miata. It is meant for a Miata, but really it's a universal Wilwood valve, and they just sell it to you with the adapters for M10x1. Coincidentally, the Tacoma uses the same threading, so I was able to buy 2 of them and have one spare left for the Tacoma, because I knew I was going to do this eventually.
It costs like 50 bucks. It's pretty cheap. It's cheaper than buying a brand new LSPV from Toyota. I understand that a lot of guys have problems with these leaking. Mine literally never leaked until I checked it the day of, where suddenly my brakes were feeling good for the first time. And when I undid the lever, I saw a leak happen. And what I think may have happened is that it started leaking little by little, and because now it's not doing its job, I had more front brake pressure than before, so my brake pedal finally felt correct, and that's why it improved. However, obviously over time it would also just allow my brake fluid to leak out, and then I'd have no brakes. So I'm glad that I caught that, you know, inside my garage and not on the street the hard way. So if you guys have a Tacoma that still has an LSPV, I do recommend you check up on that, even though you don't plan to change it or upgrade it in any way. It's just cheap insurance. Make sure that you're safe, you don't end up in a bad situation. So heads up, it's a pretty good thing to check out. If you guys are interested in the setup, you want to learn more about it, and you want to see how it works once I get it all squared away, feel free to hit like, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you're notified when the next video is posted. I'm definitely going to be posting up more videos as I go through this process. If you have any feedback or any questions, feel free to leave that in the comment section. And as always, thank you guys for watching.